Welcome to toy-polloi. Parental guidance. This video contains scenes of Lego destruction.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and in today's video we're going to be making some repairs on this vintage Kenner Star Wars Dewback. Now, I picked this Dewback up many years ago. It was a sort of bare Dewback. It didn't have any of the accessories with it, and over the last few years I've managed to get some of those pieces, but it has some issues, so we need to sort of do some fine tuning and fine repairs to it to make it a fully displayable piece. At the moment you can see it doesn't actually look too bad, but if you try and move it or sort of rotate it around, things become apparent that it's not quite right. So let's get on with some repairs to this and see if we can get it ready to go back on display here at toy-polloi. So here is my Dewback, and what is exactly wrong with it? Well, there was one thing that I hadn't actually noticed. As I say, I picked this up as a sort of a bare Dewback a few years ago. It didn't cost me a huge amount. I think it was about £12, something like that. I showed it recently on toy-polloi too, and someone spotted straight away that there was something wrong with it that I have to say I hadn't noticed, and that's the fact that he has painted toes. The original Dewback doesn't have his toenails painted, so someone at some point has given those a coat of paint, so we need to remove that so that his feet are back to just being green. Then if we turn it around, you can see that the reins are broken. I was very kindly sent these a few years ago, and they sort of have been sat on this Dewback ever since, and you can see it's actually missing a big part of the reins. There's a whole section there missing. The reins themselves have gone fairly brittle. This rubber is sort of starting to perish, so I have to be very careful with it, but what I want to do is just make a replacement piece to go between those 2 points so that it actually sort of sits quite nicely. Then I believe it is actually coming apart at the seams. If we take the Stormtrooper out and we can take off the seat here, this seat isn't an original seat. This was actually very kindly sent to me by Steve. It's a 3D print. He sent it to me unpainted, and recently I gave it a coat of paint, and I've tried to sort of match the brown colour that the reins are in. It's actually a pretty reasonable 3D print. I think you can get the files for free online, so if you have a 3D printer you can print these things out yourself. It's been printed in a resin, but it has a little bit of flex to it, and it does sit on the Dewback really nicely. So yeah, all I did to that was give it a coat of paint, and it sort of does the job. But I think this figure is actually starting to sort of come apart on one side. I remember when I got it, it had been split apart, so I think we may need to do some sort of gluing on that. Yeah, I can see at the front there, it is starting to come apart. Might be we can sort of get away with not doing anything on that. Oh no, here you go, this is the side. It has just started to come apart, so I reckon just a little bit of plastic weld put in that will sort of fix that back together. It's not a major issue, it's probably something that I could leave, but as we're sort of doing work on this, I think just a little bit of plastic weld in there just to hold it together. That may make some of these legs a little bit stiffer as well. So yeah, there's just a few sort of repairs to do to get this looking nice again. The first thing to do is to take the paint off of the claws there. I have had a quick go just on one claw, and it seems to come off pretty reasonably, so let's get the rest of this paint off. To clean these nails, I was going to go down the route of using brake fluid. I've shown multiple times how to do it, and I've actually worked out a new technique where you don't have to submerge the whole thing in brake fluid. You can just sort of put the brake fluid on a bit of kitchen towel and then soak the affected area. But on these, the paint really isn't held on that well, so I think we can just scrape it off. I've got some tools here. These are tools used for sort of opening up mobile phones and things like that, so these are all plastic tools. And I have this one, which is a sort of mildly pointed little stick, and I've given a quick sort of rub on some of these toenails just to see what happens, and you can actually flake off all of the paint. It really hasn't stuck well at all, so it's going to be a boring job, but I think the best way to do this and to cause the least damage and the least problem to this toy and the plastic is just to go around and scrape it off. You can see that one has removed pretty cleanly. There's a little bit left on, so maybe a brush with a toothbrush afterwards and some hot soapy water. But I think that's going to be the way to do it. It's going to be a boring job because it's going to take sort of 20 minutes, half an hour to do, but I reckon that's going to be the way to get all of this paint off and clean up his toes. So let's just get scraping. paint came off remarkably easily. You can tell it wasn't factory paint, it just sort of flaked off. Those tools are plastic tools, so you're essentially pushing plastic onto plastic, so it doesn't really damage what's underneath. But that paint was sort of barely held on, it really just sort of flaked off. And I'm sort of wondering whether there's some extra paint added to this as well, there's little sort of bits of patterning. I'm not going to bother removing that because it's sort of less noticeable than the toenails, but it does look a little bit like there's some extra paint on the bottom there. But it was the toenails that were bothering me because you don't see most of the rest of it sort of when it's standing like that. So I think removing the toenail paint is about as far as I'm going to go on this. We do now need to repair the fact that it is split apart. The plastic used on the body will work perfectly well with plastic weld. The plastic on the arms is different, so that's not going to be affected. So my idea is I'm just going to sort of slightly pull this apart and drop a little bit of plastic weld into where I can see there are some sort of flanges on the inside and a little bit there, and then that should sort of glue it back together, and then we can get on with the reins. It's not going to take much to attach this back together. It obviously looks like there was very little glue there in the first place, so just a little bit of plastic weld will fix that, and I think that will tighten up this arm, which is a little bit on the loose side at the moment because it's split apart. So let's put a bit of plastic weld on that, and then we'll get on with the rest of the fixes. Yeah, immediately you can feel that that has fused together, so that's enough. Just a tiny amount put on there, and that's going to hold it back together. And yeah, that leg does feel a bit tighter. So that's good, that's all fixed those issues.
Toyannoi, that is incorrect. Try again.
Now we come onto the reins, and you can see there's a big chunk missing here which we need to replace, and I've sort of been wondering how to do that for quite a long time, thinking maybe I could find some tubing or something like that, and in the end the old Lego box of bits has come in handy because I found this. It's a sort of Lego hose. It's got two Lego sort of pips at the end, so you can actually sort of attach it to Lego pieces, and then a rubbery hose in the middle. I'll put the name of it and the number at the bottom of the screen, and that seems like a perfect sort of starting point. It's about the right diameter, and I think we can probably paint it as well once it's done, painted a brown colour. It looks to be pretty much a perfect length, and as with everything Lego is very easy to deal with. So first thing we need to do is remove these end pieces, which look like they are just clipped on. So we can remove those. Yep, they just unping. I'll put them back in my spares pot because you never know when you're going to use them. And now we're left with just the middle rubber hose piece, and I think if we cut these end pieces off, what we can do is insert a tiny piece of paper clip. So I'm going to drill some holes, which is why I've got my pin vise here with a tiny drill bit in. So I think the idea is if I cut these end pieces off, drill some holes in that, then I'm going to be very careful to drill some holes in this, because as I say, this plastic or rubber has gone fairly brittle, which I think is why it's broken. So this piece should be reasonable to drill a hole in. This bit I'm not so sure, and I only need to insert a very small piece of paper clip into there, and then we can stick this on just using a bit of super glue. I might have to sort of cut it to length once we got it in place just to check the sort of fit of it, but I reckon that should sort of work, and maybe we can get away with not painting it, just leave it black, but maybe we'll need to put a bit of paint on top of it. I'll see when it's all put together. So let's cut this bit of Lego up and start fixing it all together. That actually works way better than I was expecting it to. I've just sort of placed it on here for the moment just to see what it looks like. And I think that is really not too bad at all. It's obviously black at the moment, so we will have to paint that, but the general sort of way it fits in and the scale of it really isn't too bad at all, considering it is just a piece of Lego with the ends cut off. So I'm now going to glue that in place. At the moment this isn't even glue, this is just held on with the friction of the paperclip inside the sort of pieces of rubber. I'm going to put a little bit of super glue on each piece of paperclip and then sort of push it back in place, and that will just sort of hold everything pretty firmly, and then we'll get some paints out, mix them up and see if we can match this brown colour. The coat of paint has really helped that. It's very hard to spot now. You can see it's sort of a slightly different texture, but yeah, once that's on the Dewback, you're not going to notice that that has been replaced. I didn't have an exact colour for this. I've just sort of mixed something up. I've got this game colour called Beastie Brown, which was the sort of base for that. I then added some black to it, a tiny amount of red, and then a little bit of white, and I've got a colour, as you can see, that's a pretty close match. I'm sure no two of these will be exactly the same. They will have all aged slightly differently, and the colour will be slightly different. So you're just going to have to sort of mix and match until you get a colour that's the same if you need to fix something like this. Now that this is dry, I'm going to put a clear coat on it, which is this satin varnish Vallejo sort of top coat, which is 70.522. That will just finish off the look and give it that sort of nice satiny finish that you can see over here on the original reins, and then we can put it back on the Dewback. And here we go, this is the Dewback all together, and he's looking really rather nice now. I'm not quite sure how I didn't notice the fact that his sort of nails had been painted there, but now that I've removed the paint, it does look a lot more like the sort of original version of the Dewback that you would have bought back in the 70s and 80s. And as you can see, the repair that I've made to the reins, although not perfect, by the time this is on display with the rest of my collection, I think you would be hard pushed to notice. And as I sort of mentioned right at the start, even the saddle of this is not an original, this is a 3D print, so this is a bit of a sort of a mishmash version of a Dewback, but it still looks really nice. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.